officers. We have on the phone with us John Wolf, who is an attorney in Chattanooga who focuses and takes an interest in cases of this kind of abuse of the citizenry by law enforcement. John, you've just filed a case on behalf of a man named Gary Lee Lips, who was mauled by a police dog in Bradley County. What's the case about, John Wolf?
Well, it's good to see you, and thanks for all your investigative work and what you're doing. You're really a tribute to the community. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today. To tell you the truth, I've worked so hard the last 2 or 3 days having to fight these cases and stuff that I had to take a morning of rest. But what happened was, on Mr. Lips, they came out there. He was ready to surrender. What he had done, the only thing Mr. Lips was wanted for was a misdemeanor. He failed to appear on a misdemeanor. And the other thing I think he did was he had failed to pay child support, and there was a civil warrant out for his appearance there. He wasn't armed. He'd known the Watson family for years. He'd met Eric Watson. Eric Watson had gone to church with his father. He had sung in the choir with his father. In fact, the funny thing about all this is all afternoon, the two of them, Eric Watson, imagine that,
the sheriff of Bradley County,
on social media, they were going back and forth with each other. And Gary, of course, they knew that Gary wasn't armed. And Watson was telling him to come on in. I know that you want to do the right thing. And he was saying, okay, let me just see my kids just for a second or two, and then I'll come on in. And so, the guy was never armed, never dangerous, but yet they brought a canine out there, and Watson's wife was in tow. And why that was is because his wife writes 32% of the bonds, and Gary's family had selected Tennille as the bondsman, or the bonds lady, whatever you want to call her. But her business has increased by 32% from the time the sheriffs took office. I mean, this is like it was more like a bounty hunt than an arrest. They could have achieved this.
Well, hold on for a second.
It's not that they bring a canine named Joker. They call him. He has an official title there. The canine that bit him, he's called Canine Deputy Joker. They even salute him up and down the halls at Bradley County like he's a regular person. I mean, and then they unleashed the canine on Gary, but he has his hands up in the air. There's 16 officers there. They can see Gary's unarmed, but they unleashed the canine. The canine goes up and down the top half of Gary's right leg and bites out about 16 chunks of it. And he's still disfigured and everything else. He survived it. Luckily, the dog didn't cut an artery up there or anything. And he's now, of course, able to participate in litigation against Watson for this reckless and ridiculous injury that he received for no real reason.
How much are you demanding in damages, John Wolf, attorney?
What's that, sir?
How much are you demanding in damages from Bradley County?
$3 million in compensatory damages, and then, of course, $2 million in punitive damages for this sort of activity that's got to be discouraged, this sort of thing. See, the thing is, they can't use the force, any more force than they could have used. They can't use, for instance, a dog to do something they couldn't do. In other words, if they had been able to subdue Gary, they couldn't bite up and down his legs and disfigure him and all that sort of thing. So they can't use a dog to do what they can't do legally. And it's, I think that we've filed our case. Watson's come back at us in the media. He's called me a Democrat. I guess he's running for re-election. He says, I filed this thing to affect the election. Problem about that is we had to file because of statute of limitations. We waited up until the last day to try to resolve things. But, the statute of limitations happened to run on April the 16th, which is exactly 15 days before the election. So we were trying to get it where it wouldn't come out as a lawsuit right before the election, but they were just too stubborn to try to resolve anything. So we were forced to file the suit. And he makes the reference about me having run for office as a Democrat. Well, I mean, what does that have to do with the lawsuit? And then he goes ahead and calls Gary a career criminal and all that sort of thing. I mean, that's what Bradley County normally does, is they come back and slam the person who's the victim, and he didn't even say anything about the dog. He claimed that the dog bites or Gary's injuries or anything. He said that the officers subdued Gary after Gary had hit the dog in the nose and in the face, and that's the biggest joke in the world. the other thing is, and this is real important, is they took a lot of pictures there at the scene, and suddenly those pictures are gone. We can't get them. We've tried to subpoena them through the county attorney. Again, Bradley County is doing what it usually does. It's either tampering with or it's destroying or altering evidence. They have a history of doing this going all the way back to 2003 when I first started bringing lawsuits against them. 15 years of my career, has been dominated by this one police force. And it's a rogue force. Now, they had some good sheriffs in between, but, they really, need to, they really need to bring somebody in from the outside, I think, and just revamp and restructure the whole organization, and especially the jail, which has been out of compliance for years, overcrowding, everything else.
Well, the statement, John Wolf, by Sheriff Eric Watson, as you say, points out your plaintiff, Gary Lee Lipps, and calls him he's well known for his criminal history. Again, that is always that to me that seems like a distraction, because it doesn't matter what the man's past is. If at that moment he has his hands up, he's surrounded by 16 deputies, they're all armed, he is not armed. It doesn't matter what your history is. At that moment, you're like Adam. You're like, man universal. You're like the common man. Anybody would be in that position. Again, regardless of history, whether virtue or vice, at that moment, you are a subject to them and you are surrendering. They can't reasonably unleash that kind of tremendous, in a way, uncontrollable, violent, gnawing force against the citizen in making an arrest.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you measure the force of a dog's jaws like that, a German Shepherd, when it's in full bite, it could lift, if you could translate that force onto a weight machine, it would lift 95 pounds. I mean, that's how strong it is.
And if that dog is twisting his head to break the neck, let's say, break the neck of an animal that's its victim, that can snap a bone. And were Gary Lee Lipps' bones broken, or just the flesh gnawed off?
You're talking about Gary's hand. Gary's hand was intact. Now, what the officers did after it happened, they said, "Look at your hand; it's bleeding. You hit that dog." And he said, "No, my hand's fine, sir. Look at it." And he showed him his hand. They were trying to make it look like he had attacked the dog. But even if he did hit the dog coming forward in his face, he probably had the right to resist the dog, because the reason being, he wasn't a dangerous fleeing felon. He wasn't wanted for anything that had to do with a danger to the police or the public. I mean, he's not, he has a felony in his past, but that was for some kind of, I think, a transfer title or some sort of fraud that was alleged with regard to a car swap with somebody he already knew. Then after that, there wasn't anything more than the failure to pay child support, and then this simple possession charge. The guy was not a dangerous fleeing felon. Now, if somebody's a dangerous fleeing felon, you might have the right to use deadly force. And I think the dog and everything qualifies as deadly force. Only, because they're fairly new, there may not be precedent out there as to how the courts look at the dogs as deadly force or whether they don't. But that's something we'll have to research. I would say that is deadly force, because they break the skin, they seriously wound. They can, what they do often results in serious bodily injury, which is under Constitution equated to deadly force or deadly action.
And let me ask you about
this. It's been something else. And Watson's reply was just ridiculous. They didn't even spell all their words right. They sent it to the Times Free Press. Asked the Times Free Press to print it verbatim. I mean, it attacked me, and attacked him too, and it was just all political and nothing else.
Right.
And,
the press release does seem a little bit semi-literate.
And also the thing about that's good about your independent journalism is Watson has basically kowtowed the Daily Banner. The Daily Banner won't even report about this dog bite. This case and everything. They won't report a thing about it. Just like when the city of East Ridge, they had a fellow there that worked as police chief there for several years. He looked at the sheriff's race. This is the city of Cleveland. He looked at the sheriff's race and decided to endorse Watson's opponent, Mr. Lawson, and the Daily Banner wouldn't even report it. I mean, Cleveland's only newspaper that's been around for about 80 years wouldn't even report that the city police chief of Cleveland endorsed Watson's opponent. That's how closely aligned they are with Watson.
Well, that is a problem, and I think sort of outside the scope of our conversation. This is David Toulis. Thank you for joining us here at 92.7 and 95.3 HD4 high definition channel 4, reaching out 60 miles. We are the station that covers local economy and the free market, and I argue that you should love your neighbor and buy local. Now, there is in the actions of these deputies, John Wolf, attorney with a long civil rights interest in protecting victims of law enforcement. There is in their part a view of their subject of the citizen as property. There is a kind of proprietary sense that officers have of their, I call them the victims, and law enforcement it does some good things. It does apprehend criminals. It does charge people for committing common law crimes like theft, assault, rape, and murder and the like. But there's also this other element that's outside of peacekeeping and outside of rounding up genuine criminals, and that's called law enforcement. And there is in all of these acts this propriety that the officer has a kind of ownership of the person, and that ownership of the citizenry by deputies such as Dale Liner in the April 18th traffic stop and abuse of Jamichael Parks, who is making a video of a transportation stop. That ownership sense is very clear in Jamichael Parks's account of his arrest. What can you tell us, John Wolf, about Jamichael Parks and his attempt to video a public activity of public servants?
Well, the thing is you go out there, and anybody can go to that place. You can see for yourself. I mean, he was standing on the curb. It was not a threat. The officers had already seen him inside the store. He wouldn't have even tried to videotape anything, but, the officers were getting kind of rough out there. They were taking his cousin's car apart for no reason, and they didn't find anything. It was just probably a profile stop. And that's what they do. I know that they do that because when I was in Bradley County one time, well, I had a friend with me she's half Hispanic and half black, and she works with me around the house and does chores for me. And this officer was coming in the opposite direction, saw us, and turned around and stopped us. No reason at all. Everything was fine. But that's what they do. And then a lot of times they set up these places like on, you can see it like on I-75, usually about right around Charleston. They do profiling every weekend and stuff. You'll see people that are mostly blacks or Hispanics. Their cars are turned inside out. They're having to get out of their trunks. And, that's because Bradley County and those people up through their profile. They do it all the time. We had one guy that worked in our office, or down the hall from our office, who was an investigator for the state of Tennessee. He used to have to travel back and forth to Knoxville in his bright red new car. And they pulled him over about once a month, profiling and stuff like that. And the same thing happened to Mr. Jamichael. The very same thing happened to him and his family. They were out there, and Dale Liner has a history of this. He tried to chest bump both of them. He asked both of them if they wanted to go to jail. He was trying to be rough. He was trying to be intimidating. I don't know if what he taken that day, but he acted like somebody who just was just overdrawn on his masculinity and trying to make a show.
Right. And
all he did was escalate tensions. He put Jamichael down on the sidewalk, and for 45 minutes he was handcuffed there, sitting there. In the meantime, they did something that was just as bad almost, and that was to go through his cell phone after they took it from him and try to erase everything. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they were unsuccessful, and we still have the view of what happened. They didn't even know how to go through the cell phone correctly, I guess, to destroy evidence, but they sure gave the best try they could. And so now we have, that case too, plus the unlawful detention, plus the assaultive behavior. And, it's just one thing goes after another. I mean, where does this all land in Bradley County?
This is David Toulis, and we're talking with John Wolf, attorney in Chattanooga, with a long interest in protecting citizens from police and deputy abuse. Now, there's a claim that's being made administratively by Jamichael Parks that would not necessarily be part of your cause of action, if there is a cause of action in his arrest. And that claim is abusive language. Dale Liner, according to the affidavit, published at yournews.com. That is to say, yournews.com here, and also Nuganomics. He uses the word that starts with the word mother and has another part, a suffix to that. Mind your M business and get your ass in the gas station. And these deputies harassed this man with vile language, calling him dumbest and stupidest. Things like you're the stupidest person I've ever met, that you would interfere with a traffic stop. I mean, good grief, that's the kind of thing he was saying. And the girl, there was a young woman named Valdacia Whaley, 17, John Wolf, who heard the MF word used in her presence. Now, she's a minor, and I'm wondering, administratively, is there some administrative rule that would be a cause for firing of this officer for using profane language like that could not be repeated before the county commission? If one were to give a report of this instance, I mean, one should probably repeat it and ask these commissioners, do you accept that from your sheriff and your deputies using that kind of language? Is there administrative cause for action for firing based on that kind of record, John Wolf, would you suppose?
No, I would think so. It's something that needs to be looked into. Dale Weiner, what we've done too is what we've heard, and we need to check this out before we state it categorically. But, he had some pretty rough days over in East Ridge, Tennessee, which is not too far from where I live. So I called over there yesterday to the folks that used to employ him, and they're going to go ahead and give me his entire personnel file, and they're going to go ahead and give me all the use of force reports he used over there. They're also going to go ahead and give me all the papers that reflect why he was terminated, or I should say why his employment ended. And as soon as I get those, I'll give you a call and we can discuss it, because I'm thinking there's going to be a lot there that's going to explain exactly. Well, it'll make it easier to understand what happened last week. He's been doing this in other cities, I think. I think that's what it's going to show, but the proof will be in the pudding to get those papers.
Right, and they
were very cordial at East Ridge. They had no problems. They said, we'll get the information. You just get us a request in writing. And I said, yes, I'll do it.
There's a public policy problem there in the larger picture, John Wolf, of officers who are police nomads. They go from one jurisdiction to the next. They're being fired or laid off or forced to resign for abuse, often under the shadow of lawsuits. And they go on to new places that hire them thinking, oh, we have a new deputy willing to meet our rules. But then once on the road, the officer is abusive to people, and perhaps the main one is pretext stops, not having actual probable cause for a search and seizure or arrest. Jermichael Parks and his cousin Terrell, they were told, you're not under arrest, you're just being detained. However, if they're not free to leave, John Wolf, they are under arrest. Is that correct? If you're not free to leave, you are under arrest.
Yeah, detention is the same thing. Detention is, the only difference is the word detention implies some sort of temporariness about it. It'll be over with in a short time. But no, they didn't do anything, and especially Terrell, I think, who didn't even do any of the filming or anything. I was kind of surprised that they treated him the way they treated him. But all the paperwork that's been done, and all the work that you've done, and everything has been submitted. It's been the documentation on a case 14 days old, which I think this one has been superb. In fact, it's not even 14 days old. It's about 12 days old. You've got everything in place. The police have a chance to actually come out and do something, administratively to correct the problem, to at least publicly censure Dale Weiner for what he's done. And we'll see what they do. They have two ways they can look at it. Either try to destroy what was on the cell phone. That's definitely illegal. And then, of course, come in and tell him he can't, he cannot film the scene where there's 5 officers and he's not interfering with the arrest in any way. He came right toward, once he saw that cell phone pointed, he came right over the curb to Judge Jermichael and told him, to stop. And, took it right out of his hands. So that he didn't make a request that, like, okay, you need to stay back 20 feet and film from there. And that's the proper way to handle that, is to set the rules, in a fair and objective way.
Give notice.
And if Michael didn't follow it, then maybe follow up with another request. To say that you need to do this and do that before he took any detention action or anything like that. I think, he should have done that. He didn't do that either. They're training. I think they're basically just trained They don't have any training to the contrary. I mean, everything is just permitted in Bradley County.
This is David Toulis, and we're talking with John Wolf. John, thank you so much for joining us. We are here chatting about arrest. And John, thanks again. Thanks for joining us, John. David Toulis.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD4, 92.7 FM's news now.
Bradley County deputies arrested a 19-year-old man they say was breaking into cars throughout the community. The Bradley County Sheriff's Office says they arrested Joseph Lee Osterland after just 36 hours of investigating. Osterland faces criminal charges of 9 counts of auto burglary, 3 counts of theft under $1,000. At the school board meeting, Superintendent Dr. Brian Johnson asked for $500,000 to hire school resource officers. TN Ready scores won't count due to the cyber attack. According to the